All right, here we are for week 8 of Now Showing with Mike and Wayne. Yes, we've made it 2 months now of shows, and we've been consistent. So we are going to hopefully...
And every girlfriend from my past says I have commitment issues. Ha! Show 2.
Proving everybody wrong. That's our goal here.
Well, I could stick to a diet plan that well.
You and me both, sir. All right, so week 8, we are going to do comic book movies, but there is a little bit of a catch to it. We're not going to talk about anything MCU, X-Men, or DCEU related. We're not going to talk about those movies because we're going to do specials on all those universes if we haven't done them yet.
No capes will be mentioned in this episode. I don't believe.
I don't think so. Actually,
No capes.
Think about it. I'm pretty sure there's no capes. I could be wrong. All right, so we're going to get started. I'm going to go first this week. I honestly don't remember who won first last week, so we're just going to... Or last week we did Seth Rogen, so we'll just start over. So I'm going to go first this week. I'm going to start with one of my favorite movies. It kind of mixes into the horror genre and the superhero genre all at the same time, which is probably why I love it. It's very dark. It's 1994's The Crow, starring Brandon Lee, Ernie Hudson, Michael Wincott, Tony Todd. It's got a big supporting cast. Basic plot: Devil's Night, October 30th in Detroit. Eric Draven and his girlfriend are enjoying their engagement. They're ready to get married. They get murdered. She gets, violently attacked, and he gets thrown out of a building. She goes to the hospital. She dies. Eric Draven's already dead, played by Brandon Lee. And then a year later, he wakes up out of the grave, comes back to life, and is coming back for vengeance. And there's a crow to symbolize in the movie. There's a crow. The crow is like his symbol of justice, kind of like the bat signal. When you see the crow around and you know he's out there, be careful because he's coming for you.
Is that why Ernie Hudson is in this movie, to catch the ghost?
Yes. He continued his ghost busting days, except this time he works with the ghost.
If you aren't familiar with our podcast, anytime we can make a Ghostbusters reference, we're going to.
It's basically been almost every episode so far. Last week, obviously, we talked about Harold Ramis, so it definitely happened there. So we've another Ghostbuster, Ernie Hudson. He is a police officer, and he is trying to solve these murders that are happening right now of this crew that they know were responsible, but they can't really arrest them because they don't have the evidence to do so. And so he's kind of following this trail that the crow is leaving behind. And, it's easy to follow when you leave big gasoline in the shape of a crow that gets set on fire. It's like, oh, well, obviously it's this guy who we think it is. Ernie Hudson's character used to be a detective. He was busted down to being a patrolman. They kind of talk loosely about why that happened. So he teams up with the Crow, and they kind of start getting this revenge plot going. It's such a cool movie. I mean, if you haven't seen it, the style of it, the cinematography is fantastic. It's directed by, let me get his name correctly here, Alex Proyas, who's done some other really cool dark movies. He did a really great job with this movie. They've been trying to get another one off the ground for years, and it just hasn't happened. But this one, it hits every mark for me. It's got great music in it, great 90s music to help with the soundtrack. It's got great gore, blood, violence, and just a great lead character. The Crow is, he's this vengeful spirit, and you're rooting for him the whole time. It's really well acted. Michael Wincott as the villain is fantastic. Tony Todd, who obviously most people know as Candyman or the creepy guy from Final Destination, he plays a kind of a different role here. He's more of a character, I would say. He's not really trying to scare anybody. He's just kind of like the top henchman. So yeah, I mean, it's got lots of memorable moments. There's the scene where he chases the guy down in the car and then sets the car on fire as it like flies off into the water, which is awesome. So then it was a scene where he takes out Fun Boy as well, who's a drug addict and one of the guys that attacked him. There's lots of cool scenes to pull from here. It's just a really great movie. It's one of those movies I probably watch, I don't know, once or twice every 2 months because it's one of those movies I kind of fall asleep to sometimes. I'll put on The Crow. Yeah, and it's always stuck with me. It's always just been one of my favorite dark, cool movies that I've kind of gone to when people talk about, what got you into this or got you into that. It kind of got me into a lot of things because it's dark, it's a horror film, it's a superhero film. So yeah, as obviously I'm talking a lot about it, I love this movie. Wayne, what are your thoughts on The Crow?
I haven't seen this movie in at least 10 years. I don't recall a lot about the film, per se, details, but what I really want to touch on is just its influence on like pop culture. It's a popular Halloween costume.
Yep.
Maybe not much anymore. If you're a fan of professional wrestling, the character known as Sting,
yes,
really kind of took up the mantra of The Crow in his face paint and his whole character's persona. So it's really been an influential film.
Yes.
And I think that's my biggest takeaway of
yes,
The Crow.
It has, and they've tried to do it several times. They did 3 sequels. The third one's supposed to be the only good one. I've only seen 2, which was terrible. And then they did a series with Mark Dacascos for a while. That went like 1 or 2 seasons. That was supposed to be good, but just nobody watched it. So it's one of those properties that they've been trying to bring back a lot. Proyas has been involved time and time again. Other directors have been involved. Bradley Cooper was attached at one point. That fell apart. The most recent one was Jason Momoa, who already has the look. Basically, take Aquaman and put the paint on him, and he's the Crow. So yeah, I mean, it's been great that it's only needed the one movie really to kind of stick in the culture. It hasn't had successful sequels to make it stick around, but that one movie from 1994 has made people go like, man, that movie was almost perfect. Like, why can't we recreate that? And they've been struggling to do so. We'll see if it happens eventually. I have a feeling we'll see another Crow movie at some point in our lifetime. But yeah, it's always, like I said, to me, it's always been one of my favorite movies. So yeah, wait, what's your first pick?
All right. I went with the 2014 film Kingsman: The Secret Service. It's a spy organization recruits a promising street kid into the agency's training program while a global threat emerges from a twisted tech genius. This movie stars Colin Firth as Harry Hart, Agent Galahad. Samuel L. Jackson is the evil mastermind, Valentine. Sir Michael Caine plays Arthur. And the star of this film, the breakout performance, in my opinion, is Taron Egerton playing Gary Eggsy Unwin. This was a surprise. When I first saw trailers and stuff, I thought, oh, okay, this is kind of cool. I mean, a lot of cool stop motion and effects and whatnot. Obviously, a lot of English actors in there. I gotta love the accents and whatnot. Good times. So, going into it, I didn't have a real high expectations. I just wanted, like, hey, hopefully action, fun. And this movie blew my expectations out of the water. It's funny. It's got action. It gives you your feels a tingle. It's just a really fantastic film. It's funny that you brought up popular, like when you're talking about The Crow, how the first movie was fantastic, and then the sequel, kind of bit.
Yeah, it's okay.
The Kingsman had a sequel in, I believe it was 2016, called 2017. The Golden Circle.
Mm-hmm.
And while it was entertaining enough, it did not nearly live up to my expectations of the predecessor.
Yes.
And I would hope that they would revisit this at some point, but I believe Taron Egerton has moved on from the franchise, so we would need to have a reboot in most cases, but you never know. Never say never.
Well, he has moved on, but there is a prequel coming out that's supposed to come out this year, so we'll see if it actually sees the light of day this year or next year. Due to the pandemic, it's been delayed, right. Obviously. That one has Ralph Fiennes, and it has, I forget who plays him, but it's a young Harry Hart. So
nice.
That looks pretty good. Takes place during like World War II, I think. But anyway, continue on Kingsman.
Yep. No, I'm not going to get my hopes up. This is directed by Matthew Vaughn. I'm not familiar with him, so maybe you can give us a little bit of insight.
Matthew Vaughn, he did X-Men First Class. He did another comic book movie, Kick-Ass. He also started with Layer Cake. He was a Guy Ritchie guy. He worked with him for a while on a lot of his British gangster films, and then broke off, did Layer Cake, his own British gangster film, and then and then he did X-Men First Class, and then Kick-Ass really kind of put him on his own, because that was like he finally broke away from all the big other producers, made his own movie, and everybody loved that movie, and then that led him to Kingsman and so on, and his career is still going. It's going strong.
Very nice, very nice. I also want to talk about two Marks that also play a role in this movie. First one is Mark Strong playing the role of Merlin.
One of my favorite character actors of right now.
Absolutely, just fantastic. Just I don't want to say he steals any scenes, but if you're talking about the quality supporting actor in every scene that he is in, just advances the scene. The dialogue is spot on, and just he and Taron Egerton really mesh really well as a team, and he was actually one of the bright spots in the second film.
Yes, I was just going to say that. He was something I liked about the sequel. One more thing before you get to the next Mark. But I like it that there's Mark Strong and Samuel L. Jackson in this movie, because I look at Mark Strong as the Samuel L. Jackson of England. If you watch any British movie ever made, Mark Strong is in there somewhere. It may just be a small part. It may be a big part. Sometimes you don't even know it, and you're watching, like, oh, shit, Mark Strong. You're like, of course he's here. And it's the same with Samuel L. Jackson, as Americans know. He's in basically every movie ever made. So
I have to disagree. He was not in any of the Harry Potter films. So.
It's true. That is, you know what? That's true, and that's very weird, because he wasn't.
It's a crime, actually.
It is a crime. He wasn't super well known back then, but he was still acting. So it's a little shocked that he was not in those movies. All right, so continue on.
I just want to give a shout out to this second Mark, Mark Hamill. He's a guy, he does some voices, swings around a laser sword a little bit. Obviously, I am talking about the gentleman who portrayed Luke Skywalker in 6 Star Wars movies, I believe. Yes. He was officially in 6.
Yes.
There was a child portraying Luke in Episode 3, but that was obviously not Mark Hamill.
Yes.
When Mark Hamill popped up in this movie, I'm like, wait a minute. Luke Skywalker. But he plays Professor Arnold. He's in it for a couple of scenes.
Yeah. They kidnap him. Yeah, he's one of the big people they kidnap. Now, do you want to... I know why he was in it. Do you want me to tell you why he was in it?
I do, sir. Yes, I do.
So, in the comic book, the original comic book, which I actually own, but I've yet to read, but I know about it already. Mark Hamill is in the comic book as Mark Hamill. He's one of the celebrities that gets kidnapped. So then when they made the movie, they wanted to put him in the movie as a different character. And the comic... I thought you were actually going to go with Mark Miller, who wrote this and Kick-Ass. So Mark Miller had that, it must have been, obviously, as most people are, huge Star Wars fans. So he threw Mark Hamill into the comic. They were able to get him in the movie, which I think was a nice little cameo for fans of the comic. So it was a nice touch there, I believe, by Matthew
And all of the Star Wars nerds got something to get excited about.
Exactly. You know, Mark Hamill doesn't do a lot of movies these days, so it's always fun to see him in something. There's a couple newer movies he's in. He did the voice of Chucky in the new Child's Play. So, like, just to have him in those movies these days, because we don't get them a lot, it's always fun to have him in there.
Yeah. Obviously, Mark Hamill is also one of the most recognizable voices of the Joker.
Yes,
in the Batman cartoons, the animated series, and whatnot. I don't honestly know all of them, but he has portrayed the Joker several times.
Yeah, some of the movies and stuff, the animated films, yeah.
Yes. All right, sir, let's go on to your next pick if you're ready.
All right, give me one sec here. My next pick is the 2005 comic classic Sin City. I have actually, unlike my other two picks, I've actually read the majority of these comics. So I'm a big fan. I'll be honest, I didn't start reading them until I heard about the movie coming out. I'm a huge Robert Rodriguez fan, always have been since Desperado, back in 95, I think. And that's when I just kind of stuck with him. So Sin City, when I heard about this movie, I'm like, well, I got to start reading the graphic novels. I picked up a few. They're awesome. They're fantastic. Sin City, it's like 3 or 4 stories in one movie. It's got a huge cast, so we'll run through that real quick. Jessica Alba, Benicio del Toro, Brittany Murphy, Clive Owen, Mickey Rourke, Bruce Willis, Elijah Wood. That's just to name a few. I mean, there's plenty of people in this movie. It starts off with this one scene with Josh Hartnett, and it's just a minor scene. Not all the stories they connect, but they don't directly connect and necessarily have a meaning with with each of them. So it's like little vignettes. So one thing about this movie that I think it nailed perfectly is whenever we talk about comic book movies, everyone that's a fan of comics wants it to look like the comic. Well, Robert Rodriguez knew this. He brought in Frank Miller to co-direct the movie with him. Mostly Robert Rodriguez directed it, but Miller was there to does this look right? When you had this in the comic, is this how it was supposed to be? So they took the comic books and they basically just put them up there and they looked at them and were like, all right, so we got to shoot this exactly how it is. They got the colors correct. They got the characters correct. Every way they looked, they had to do massive makeup on Mickey Rourke. Bruce Willis, they had to make sure he was all scarred up like his character in the comic. That yellow bastard, played by Nick Stoll, they had to make him like just look disgusting, which they do a really good job of, and it's kind of very gross in the movie what happens to him. So it's just they nailed the aesthetic of this comic book in this movie, and it was like something we hadn't seen before. Sure, we've seen comic book movies, we've seen dark comic book movies, but this one took it to another level. Robert Rodriguez, the one thing that he has done, whether you like it or not, he has mastered green screen filmmaking. And that's what this movie was basically shot. It was all green screen. They didn't really shoot on site. It was all done, a lot of it was done in his garage because he built up this nice big green screen. If you watch the bonus features, you could see like him filming and stuff. He brought in Quentin Tarantino to do a scene. He did the scene where, spoiler alert, Benicio del Toro's character gets murdered, but the character that is with him, I believe it's Bruce Willis's character, it's been a while since I've seen it, is driving in the car and his head starts speaking. So I believe that was the scene that Tarantino did. Nice. It was a really crazy scene. It was just but Tarantino is a director who doesn't use a lot of green screen. He shoots on set a lot. When he went and he shot that scene, even he was like, damn, this is awesome. Like, I didn't have to go anywhere. I just came to our garage. We shot a scene and it's going to be in a big budget movie. Like, this is awesome. It's just a cool way to shoot your movie, I think. I think it can be done very cheesily, and he's done some bad movies with it. I've never seen Shark Boy and Lava Girl. I heard it's terrible, but like that's an example of probably like how you could screw it up. But Sin City was a perfect movie for that because you needed to CGI in the backgrounds to make it look like the comic book. Like there's a lot of like white lights going on, lots of like just really cool effects that you can't do in a live action movie, and then do it later where it looks cool. So they had to shoot everything and then kind of put it all together like that. And I thought it was just a really cool idea. It's really dark. The cast is fantastic. Elijah Wood gives a really great performance as this like assassin who never speaks, but he just plays creepy really well in this movie.
Where's the ring, Frodo?
Yeah. This was like right after that was basically like right after he finished the Lord of the Rings saga. I think it was like 2 years later he did this, and he's kind of been in this genre ever since. He really I don't think he ever wanted to go back. He made his money off Lord of the Rings, and he's done a lot of like kind of more indie comic book horror type things, and this is probably what led to that. But yeah, Bruce Willis this was back when he gave really great performances. He was great in it. Mickey Rourke, I think this was the movie that shot Mickey Rourke back to stardom for the couple years where he was nominated for The Wrestler. He was in Iron Man 2, and lots of, kind of bigger, juicier roles coming his way because of this movie, because he was so good as Marv. And Marv... Huh?
What are my birds?
Yeah.
Iron Man 2?
Iron Man 2, yes. But he... is joined by Clive Owen and Bruce Willis, and they both give really good performances. Brittany Murphy was in it, so, it was one of her last roles. Maybe, I can't remember when she passed, but it was one of her last big box office roles, I would say. Big budget movie roles. But yeah, and it just had Rosario Dawson's in it, Michael Clark Duncan.
Michael Clark Duncan.
Yeah, it's got such a great cast. Nicky Katt, who's a character actor I'm a big fan of.
Dave from Dazed and Confused.
Yeah,
yes,
exactly. He's in it. He plays the guy who takes an arrow in the head, and also
how about Tommy Flanagan?
From Sons
of Anarchy.
Yep. I talked about the cast a little bit, but you got Jessica Alba, Devon Aoki, Alexis Bledel, Powers Booth, Rosario Dawson, Benicio del Toro, Michael Clark Duncan, Rick Gomez, Carlo Gugino, who's great in it, Josh Hartnett, Rutger Hauer, Jamie King, Michael Madsen, Brittany Murphy, Nick Offerman, who I think most people don't realize is in it. He plays one of the bad henchmen, where all the prostitutes are, and that's the gang of girls in Sin City. They're like prostitutes with guns, knives, swords. Marley Shelton, Nick Stahl, Bruce Willis, Elijah Wood, Tommy Flanagan, Lisa Marie Newmeyer. It's a huge cast. Great movie, lots of fun. It's very violent, so if you're not into violent movies, obviously don't watch it. Unfortunately, like the other two movies we've talked about, the sequel did not live up to the hype.
Yeah.
It took way too long for them to make it, and I feel like when they made it, their heart wasn't as in it anymore. They just made it because people wanted it. it sucked because it had Ava Green is one of the main characters, and she was great. Josh Brolin was fantastic. It actually did a prequel story, so they were able to bring Marv back, who was great because Josh Brolin's character played Clive Owen's character before his face gets all messed up. So that's something. If you read that story, that was actually one of my favorite comic stories from this series. So I was really disappointed when they brought it to the screen, and it was like, oh man, Joseph Gordon-Levitt was in it too, so that gave me high hopes. But his storyline was written just for that movie. And his stuff was good. The main story, which sucks, is what I wanted from that second movie. They screwed it up, and it just wasn't as good, and it was not as fun. Didn't care for it. But the first one, awesome. Everyone should see it if you like this style of movies. It's not for everybody, obviously, but it's one of those movies too. Like, I'll continue to buy special edition Blu-rays of this movie if they keep making them, because it's just so cool to look at. And anytime they advance the technology, it's so cool to see a movie like this get its nice look to it, like 4K look to it.
For my second pick, I chose the 1997 blockbuster Men in Black, starring Tommy Lee Jones, Will Smith, Vincent D'Onofrio, Linda Fiorentino, Rip Torn, with appearances by Tony Shalhoub and other folks that we'll get to. So, if you're not familiar with Men in Black, you must be living under a rock. But hey, no insults, no judge. It's all good. There's a lot of things that Turkey talks about that I have no clue. So, hey, no judge. All right. Little synopsis of Men in Black. A police officer from New York City joins a secret organization that polices and monitors extraterrestrial interactions on Earth. This is in the heyday of the 90s 4th of July summer blockbuster reliefs. Reliefs. To watch a film so entertaining.
Yes.
Will Smith dropped an awesome soundtrack along with this film. Where do we even get started? It's one of those sci-fi action thrillers that's just entertaining from beginning to end, in my opinion. Tommy Lee Jones plays the mentor to Will Smith's character, and who I really want to touch on, though, really is the best part about this movie, is Vincent D'Onofrio's character.
Yes.
He plays a farmer named Edgar who was killed in a alien space crash by a ginormous cockroach who peels his skin off, eats the body, and wears the skin around, hunting down the galaxy. And it's just an amazing character portrayal, and just, I don't think there's anything I've ever seen, any work of Vincent D'Onofrio's that I didn't think he was fantastic in. He's
one of those actors that, even if the movie's bad, you can usually count on him to give you a really good performance. I'll use an example here. I told you how bad the Death Wish remake with Bruce Willis was. A bright spot, Vincent D'Onofrio as his brother. He was actually really good because, you know why? He brings it every time he comes to set. And that's what you get out of this movie, and you get probably, Agent K and Agent J are awesome, Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones. They have great chemistry, which is something that you really strive for in these type of movies, but you always have to have a really good villain. And I feel like people remember Edgar and the Edgar suit and the sugar water more than they remember stuff from Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones' character, because he really stands out in this movie.
Yeah, lots of good one-liners from everybody. I don't remember what their names are, but the little critters that run around, they're like little cockroaches.
They all have like regular names, I think, too.
Yeah. They're good. You found out the hilariousness of the noisy cricket. Old and busted, new hotness.
Yes.
Just the back and forth between Will Smith's and Tommy Lee Jones' characters. Yeah, this is just not the start, but Will Smith continues to just entertain fans with his interactions with aliens in the 90s.
Yes, I would say this one, while Independence Day was the first big July 4th movie he had, Men in Black kind of cemented him as the king of 4th of July for a little while there.
Yeah.
Until, unfortunately, Wild Wild West came out. But in between that, you had this movie. And this movie was really good. It's very entertaining. It's probably the only one I really like. I didn't care for the sequels that much. 3 is better than 2, but 2 I thought was not good. But yeah, I mean, Will Smith, when you go and see this movie, you're coming for the characters and the charisma that Will Smith brings to the screen. And the back and forth between him and Jones is really good. My favorite scene is probably the upside down driving scene where he's Tommy Lee Jones tells him to put his seatbelt on, but he whatever, and then he flips the car and he's driving upside down. I love that scene.
I wish I knew the name of it. I think it was an Elvis Presley song.
It was an Elvis song because
that's right. No, Elvis is not dead. He just went home.
Yes.
So Elvis Presley is an alien, like so many. That's another, just like the little nuances where they're showing everybody who's really an extraterrestrial.
Yes.
Michael Jackson, who actually makes a cameo in
the second one. It's the second one, yeah.
Okay.
Dennis Rodman.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that totally fits.
Yes, that makes sense. He probably is an alien. It is funny to see, and they actually how they treat the tabloids as their actual research. Like that's where they go because that's. We don't believe the crazy people that say aliens are real, but and this movie takes that and kind of shows what if they were real, and and it really does a good job, of kind of drawing you in the beginning, with that foot chase between Will Smith and the alien who he doesn't know is an alien. Yeah, I mean it's just you're right, from top to bottom, it's a really good movie, and I think it kind of gets forgotten about that it's a comic book movie, but it is. Yep. It's from an original comic. And and it's had 3 movies, so it's done, and they've talked about doing crossovers and stuff, which I'm glad are dead in the water.
There's a 4th one with International.
You're right. I forgot about Men in Black International.
We can't really count that one because that one was also not so good.
Yeah, that one was supposed to be terrible. I'm disappointed because Chris Hemsworth and
since we're talking about Chris Hemsworth, it would have been a better movie if he just brought his damn hammer.
Yes. Chris Hemsworth and Tessa Thompson in Men in Black International had me excited before the movie came out. Then the movie came out, and I heard just how terrible it was. So I've yet to see it. I don't know that I will. I know some people that have, and they said it was awful. So, but yeah. So I mean, maybe we'll get to see another one someday that's any good. Maybe we won't. There was talks of it tying it in with the 21 Jump Street series, which I think the first 2 movies have graded that series. They haven't done another one. I just don't see it working. Why would you do that? Sony was just trying to throw things at the wall and see what would stick. So we'll see. All right. So moving on to my number 3, I'm going to go with a movie that I think, honestly, to this day, I think a lot of people still haven't seen. And I think they haven't seen it because it wasn't a box office hit. The first one wasn't very good. Didn't leave a good taste in a lot of people's mouths. Is Dredd. 2012. Stars Carl Urban of the Star Trek movies. Olivia Thirlby, who was in Juno. Wood Harris, who's a great character actor. He was on The Wire. And Lena Headey from Game of Thrones. Everybody knows her from that. As Mama.
Mama, you know I love.
They didn't play that song. They should have, though. Dredd is a movie. It was directed by Peter Travis and written and produced by Alex Garland. But recently, because Carl Urban is on the Boys series, so he's been in the press in the last couple years. He's talked about this movie because it's got like this cult status. Because it was actually a very well-received movie critically. It didn't make a lot of money for whatever reason. It was the wrong time. I think it came out like in September or something like that, or October. Maybe not the right time for it. Carl Urban has actually said that Alex Garland, the writer, and who would go on to write and direct other really good movies, Alex Garland actually directed the most of the movie because Pete Travis, they didn't think he was good enough or what. I don't know what it was. It wasn't the right idea. It's a really cool action flick, and from what I understand, it takes the comic of Judge Dredd, which in the comic he doesn't remove his helmet. Obviously, in the 90s version, you had Sylvester Stallone. Stallone wasn't going to do a movie where he didn't show his face. So that right away, when that movie was made, people were mad because they wanted him to keep his helmet on. And then there was mad for a lot of other reasons because it was basically just the Stallone 90s flick. It was basically like Demolition Man, but not Demolition Man. It was Judge Dredd. Both co-starred Rob Schneider. So
are you telling me there is a 3 seashell technique to use the bathroom?
Yes.
What about virtual reality sex? Is that in there as well? The 90s, the glorious Stallone 90s film.
The glorious 90s. So this movie...
Does Stallone make an appearance in this one? Sorry, not to cut you off.
No, he doesn't. They wanted nothing to do...
That's why people hated it.
Yeah.
They hated him when he was in 95, but now they're pissed.
They're pissed he's not back.
Not in the remake.
So they didn't want any connection, I think, to the original, because it was hated by critics, hated by fans. This movie, it kind of takes its idea from a movie that came out a couple years prior called The Raid, which is a great foreign film about a bunch of cops who go into a building and have to climb up this apartment building to get to the villain at the top. Dread is very similar. That being said, taking the kind of same story idea, it does a lot of things differently. It's a really cool, kick-ass action flick. Carl Urban is the perfect Dread because he's just got that monotone thing down to a T for what you want this character to be. He doesn't show like a lot of emotion, which he's not supposed to, because for Dread, it's black and white. Now Olivia Thirlby, she's a new recruit, and she has telekinetic power, which I'm assuming is from the comics. It wasn't in the original movie, but they have that in this. And she is more like, these people, not all these people, just because they've done bad things doesn't make them bad people. Because it takes place in a futuristic world where, like, either you're a criminal or you're a cop. Like, there's really no in between. So she takes more leeway with people than he does. He more just, all right, they tried to murder me, attempted murder, sentenced death, and then he throws him off the ledge or a balcony or shoots him in the face, as you do. And she does as well at some point in the movie. But it's a really coolly shot movie. The cinematography is fantastic in it. The drug is called slow-mo, so they have this, I'm not sure if it's in the comics, but they had this great idea of it's called slow-mo. It slows everything down for the person that takes it. So when someone takes it on screen, that shot all of a sudden is in slow motion. And it looks so badass, like the way they shot it. Lena Headey is the villain as Mama. She is fantastic. She's ruthless. She just doesn't want them to get to the top and kill her, basically. It's a simple story. It's like Dredd starts at the bottom, and he's got to get to the top to kill the bad guy. But what happens in between is what makes this movie. It's just so cool. The special effects are fantastic. The acting is great. Everybody involved was into it. They've been talking about doing another one for years. Carl Urban's down, he said. Obviously, they've been talking about doing a TV show. That might not be the case these days because he's on another TV show based on a comic book. So, but yeah, if you get a chance, I definitely recommend checking out Dredd. Again, it's a movie a lot of people skipped, and it kind of makes me angry because when you see a good movie and you know most people would enjoy it, you're like, why didn't they see it? Just see it. I didn't see it in theaters either, but as soon as it came out, I watched it, and then I bought the Blu-ray, and we've now seen it probably like 15 times. My wife loves it too. So like, it's just one of those movies that we put on when we're not feeling like picking something out. We're like, we put it on last night. I was like, Dredd, put it on. Great movie. Check it out. Definitely recommend it.
Very nice, very nice. I will check it out. I have not. I am one of those people that took a pass on it when it was in theaters, so my apologies to you for that. And inducing your rage. All right, my third pick is the 1990 comic come-to-life version of Dick Tracy. Now, if you're not familiar with the comic strip or this film, Dick Tracy first appeared in newspaper comics in 1931. A little synopsis here. The comic strip detective finds his life vastly complicated when Breathless Mahoney, played by Madonna, makes advances toward him while he's trying to battle Big Boy Caprice and his united mob. The first thing you need to know about this movie, if you haven't seen it, is just the art in this movie, from scenery to costumes. Everything is just over the top. It's fantastic. Again, this is a movie that I haven't seen probably in 20 years, but when it came to thinking about this episode and comic book origins, this had to be, if I didn't make this my one of my picks, it was definitely going to be in the honorable mentions because it's just fantastic. Warren Beatty stars as the yellow trench-coated Dick Tracy. As I mentioned, Madonna plays Breathless Mahoney. Al Pacino plays Big Boy Caprice. Just a over-the-top gangster, crazy prosthetics on him, but great character performance. The kid who is befriended by Dick Tracy, Charlie Corsmo, You may have known him from the American Pie. He's in the American Pie movies a little bit.
Can't Hardly Wait was the big one that he was in.
Can't Hardly Wait. That's what I was thinking of. He was in Hooked. Let's see. He was in What About Bob, a movie that I talked about a few weeks back.
Yep. Yeah, he was a big child actor, and I think like Can't Hardly Wait was one of his last ones, I believe, because then he went on to be like some lawyer or something.
So yeah, let's see. Who else was in this movie?
Dustin
Michael
Hoffman.
Donovan.
Dustin Hoffman is in it.
Yeah.
Plays Mumbles. He's fantastic.
Yep. William Forsythe is Flat Top. Just the characters and just the makeup and the prosthetics that went into this film. Basically, it's set in like a 1930s type genre with Tommy guns and big old cars, and Dick Tracy's trying to fight the mob.
It's one of those movies, and I think I'm with you on this. Like, it's always stuck with me. I know it wasn't well received when it came out, but for some reason it struck a chord with me, and I actually want to compare it to what I talked about with Sin City. Sin City probably was inspired by this movie because Dick Tracy decided to take the characters and how they looked in the comic and bring them to life in the movie exactly, which required a lot of makeup and prosthetics, a la Mickey Rourke in Sin City. And the characters really kind of came off the page. And I think that's really cool. It's a really cool idea. I think some people maybe felt that maybe took away from the story too much, or they didn't have time to work on the story as much. But I've always thought this movie was cool. I always liked all the characters. Warren Beatty was great. He directed it as well. But yeah, Al Pacino as Big Boy Caprice was fantastic. He really kind of owned that movie when he was on screen. And just everybody else that was involved with it too. I mean, Dick Van Dyke is in it, Charles Durning, Michael J. Pollard, Seymour Cassell, Kathy Bates,
James Tolkien
from Back to the Future, Mandy Patinkin from Princess Bride. Just people I don't even always remember who they are. Paul Sorvino was in it, James Caan, Catherine O'Hara. They had so many characters under makeup that you don't even recognize all of them when you see them on screen. But yeah, just a really cool movie. I think probably a little ahead of its time, which is maybe why it didn't get as much love as it should have back then. I do have like the special edition Blu-ray that came out a little while ago. It's really awesome. It has lots of cool features on it. So if you're a fan, pick that up for sure. I believe it's streaming on HBO Max, I think, is where I saw it last. But just such a cool movie.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, again, this is the one that I wish I would have had time this week to actually watch and review and just really remember all of the joy that I had watching this as a 8-10-year-old child, which was probably maybe not the best film for me to watch, but hey, it was the 80s or the early 90s, I should say. What do you want? But yeah, great. Just one of the cool things about this is the connection you just made about the makeup with Sin City in this film. We didn't discuss what we were going to be watching this week until we start recording this thing. So I think it's interesting that we chose films where the character portrayal with the art design and the prosthetics and
both movies relied a lot on that and how they looked and if they looked real enough for the story that you're watching, and they did it successfully, I believe. So it just shows how linked we are, Wayne.
Yep.
All right, some honorable mentions that I'll mention. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, fantastic movie that came out a couple years ago now. Let's see, what else? Kick-Ass, really great. If you haven't seen it, check that out. Ghost World, not a action-y comic book movie, a very indie comic book movie with Scarlett Johansson. Fantastic. Scott Pilgrim was almost my number 3. I really love Scott Pilgrim. Everybody should watch it. It's called Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Stars Michael Cera. Huge cast in that one. I'm not going to go through it because we're not talking specifically about that movie. But go watch it. I believe it's on Netflix still.
Yes, fantastic. I watched it about a year ago.
Okay. Yeah, it's the 10-year anniversary this year. So if you haven't seen Scott Pilgrim, definitely go watch it. Watchmen is another one that I really liked that people should see if they haven't. It's really good.
Yeah. Hellboy, pretty good.
Hellboy 1 and 2, I really like. I haven't seen the remake, or the reboot. I hear it's terrible. Here's one I wanted to talk about that I really like a lot. Mystery Men. Ben Stiller, William H. Macy. A lot of fun. Really fun movie. Again, another one like Dick Tracy. At the time it came out was not that loved, but I think has become more loved over time. Definitely worth checking out. The Rocketeer, and another one that gets no love from most people, but I love it, is Tank Girl. Is it a good movie? I don't know, but it's a hell of a lot of fun, that's for sure. And Lori Petty owns that role, and it's got a young Naomi Watts in it before she kind of became famous, so it's really good.
How about Barbed Wire, sir? Would you consider that
Barbed Wire? Well,
when I was looking through comic book movies that were really related to the DC and Marvel universes, Tales from the Crypt popped up, 1972.
It did. Tales from the Crypt did have comic books, and then it had I think there was like a movie, and then they had obviously the famous TV show from the 80s and 90s that we're familiar with.
The Crypt Keeper, yes.
Yes, with the Crypt Keeper, and it was a very comic style, and those were really cool. And I'm a huge fan of Tales from the Crypt Presents Demon Knight with Billy Zane and William Sadler and Jada Pinkett, now Jada Pinkett Smith. Fantastic movie. Another very comic book type movie, but it's a horror story, and it's great. It's, gives everything that you want out of those type of movies. Billy Zane is great as the villain, so I love that movie as well. Another comic book type movie. But there's so many out there. We just, like I said, we didn't want to focus on the ones that everybody knows about. So now going from the comic book movies we talked about, we're going to go and we're going to talk about another movie in our review of the week, which is a superhero movie, not necessarily a comic book movie because it's not based on a comic, but it could be because it plays out like a comic, I think, in a lot of ways. And that is the movie Project Power, starring Jamie Foxx, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and Dominique Fishbank. Just came out on Netflix on Friday, August 14th, if you're counting. Okay, so Project Power is directed by Henry Joost and Ariel Schulman, written by Madison Tomlin. We already talked about it. Stars Jamie Foxx as Art, and he's a man who's looking for his daughter. Joseph Gordon-Levitt is a cop in New Orleans. His name is Frank. And Dominique Fishbank plays Robin. Now, The premise of this movie is that there is a new drug out there that gives you superpowers for 5 minutes. Now, no one knows what those superpowers are going to be, so you're actually taking a risk with your life, because some people just blow up. So they don't know how anyone's going to react. And Jamie Foxx plays a guy who his daughter was stolen from him, was kidnapped, and she is someone who has powers. And then there's Frank, who's a cop who's using the drug as well to combat against the villains they now have to fight every day. And then there's Dominique Fishbank, who's a dealer of the power drug. And she kind of gets dragged into this whole thing along with Frank and Art. And it's a really interesting plot, I'd say, or interesting story.
For me, this is kind of like, I think I actually read this. This is not my own thoughts. I don't want to sound like I'm plagiarizing anything. It's like the film Limitless meets X-Men in a lot of ways.
Yes, and I would agree with that. And it actually, even like X-Men, if you've seen Deadpool, you know that like Wade Wilson had to go through a torturous process where they had to take his mutant abilities out of him so he could use them, so they could figure out what he... So it's kind of like that, where like the pill is almost like that procedure that Wade has done in the comics and the movies, is that you don't know what you're going to get. Machine Gun Kelly has a small appearance in the beginning, and his power is fire. Like, he's just... But what's cool about it, though, what I like about it, it's not like Pyro from X-Men. He's engulfed in flames, so his flesh burns, and he's got burn marks from every time that he's used this drug. It doesn't work out too well for him. So it's just a really, like, well-done, cool movie. Lots of fun, lots of action. I think it spends a lot of time on the character development between Frank and Robin and Art and Robin. Robin is kind of the centerpiece here. Obviously, you get a nice performance out of Jamie Foxx. You get a really great performance out of Joseph Gordon-Levitt. I think Dominique Fishbank is the star here. It's kind of her movie, even though these two obviously like legendary actors are carrying it. She's the one that you're focusing on most. She has a lot of the screen time, and she does a really good job. She really, I think, holds this movie together well, and shows that she can kind of go toe-to-toe with these veterans of screen. And it just, I think... Because they focus on the character, the one negative thing I will say is that some of the plot points seemed a little too, like, convenient. towards the end, but that's because we were running out of time too. Is like the last half hour, and you're like, well, you got to get moving here. But it doesn't ruin the movie, I don't think. It's just it makes you have to go like, oh, okay, well, they must have just had to do that for timing or whatever.
It's nothing so glaring that it takes you out of the moment. It's if you stop and think about it.
Yeah,
that's where I like after the movie ended, I'm like, okay, well, yeah, but during the process, it's pretty seamless. I mean, it's over the top for sure.
Oh yeah, for sure, yeah.
But
again, another big budget action flick for Netflix, and they hit this one out of the park. I like the Old Guard better, but I thought this one was a nice, like, very close second to the Old Guard in the action flicks, and that one's even comic booky as well, superhero powers and stuff. But yeah, I mean, you're really, like I said, I think this is a movie which is odd. You're kind of focusing more on the performances than you are the plot. It has a interesting plot, but at the same time, it's something that's been done over and over again. So you're not really there for that because these type of movies often involve a plot that we've seen before. It's the way they handle it, and it's the characters and the actors they bring on board, I think, that really make the movie come to life. Also, the villain, even though he wasn't in it as much as I thought he would be, Rodrigo Santoro from 300 does a nice job as the villain. Some good special effects with him as well. They you could tell they saved the budget on special effects a little bit because they don't go over the top, but I think it helped this movie. So it wasn't like this big extravagant CGI movie. A lot of it is very practical and stuff that you could kind of see them doing on their own. So
I also just want to give credit to it takes place in New Orleans and has nothing to do with Mardi Gras. I think that was a really nice move because obviously anytime Louisiana is involved, it's either in the swamps or we're talking about beads and Mardi Gras and hurricanes, which are delicious. But
yes, you know what? You're right. It was a different type of story for New Orleans. Obviously, it's a superhero story, so it's not really based in reality. But you got to kind of see a different part of it. They didn't stick with the same stuff that you see all the time. There's no Jamie Foxx running down the main street in Mardi Gras and people getting in his way like you would expect. It's just New Orleans, and I think they do a really good job with that. Yeah,
there's a couple references to Katrina, but there's no like.
They talk about how the government screwed them over because the government's not helping them with this problem, and these drugs are they're not just being sold, but they're being tested because they couldn't get approval to test humans, so they decided just to start selling it as an illegal drug. So then these cops have to go out and they have to fight these superhero villains like every day. That's why Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character Frank starts taking the drug. Because he's just fed up with it. He doesn't know how to combat against them. It's another movie that's very topical as well. I mean, it deals with a lot of things that are going on today. How we perceive people in the drug dealing business on the lower level to the higher level. And it deals with a lot with race as well. And it handles all that very well, I think. But yeah, I mean, overall, it's for entertainment, right? This movie, Joseph Gordon-Levitt has taken some years off. This year, he had 3 movies that are coming out. One was already came out. This is the second one, and he called this one the fun one. And it is. It's a lot of fun. Now, it makes you think from time to time, but it is essentially the fun action movie you want it to be. And I think everybody delivers here. As we said earlier, Dominique Fishbank is really good, but Jamie Foxx and Joseph Gordon-Levitt give really good performances. I was watching an interview with Jamie Foxx. Obviously, they can't do a lot together right now because of COVID, but Jamie Foxx was very complimentary of Joseph Gordon-Levitt and called him like the actor's actor. Like he's like, this is a thespian. That's how he referred to him as. He's like, I'm showing up here, I'm very successful, but he's like, but this guy's a thespian. He knows what to do, and he's just very professional. And it seems like all 3 leads had a really good time making this movie. They seem to all be friends afterwards. There's a lot of stuff going around online about that, and it just, like I said, it really just kind of hit all the right moments for me. It's not perfect, but I would definitely give it like a 3.5 out of 4. It's very entertaining. You're not going to feel like you wasted your time. It's just under 2 hours, so it's not very long either, which is some of the problem with these Netflix, Amazon movies is they don't get as regulated, so they're like, oh, I'm going to make a 2.5 hour Adam Sandler fart joke movie. And you're like, no, don't do that. It's a terrible idea. Ridiculous 6, if anyone's catching that right there.
That's another one that I thankfully passed on.
Yes, and you should have. But getting back to Project Power, I felt the title of it was kind of lame, but it really fits into the style of the movie. So it doesn't really, it doesn't really lose points because of that either. So that's my thoughts, Wayne. What are your final thoughts on this movie?
I'm going 4 out of 5. I highly enjoyed it. A lot of action, a lot of just good character, like we said, the character development, character interactions. Yeah, really, really good. I enjoyed it. I also like that throughout most of the movie, Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character is wearing a Steve Gleason jersey.
Yes, I caught that, and that was really awesome. If you don't know the story of Steve Gleason, everybody look him up. It's very tragic what has happened to him, but he's become a very powerful story and an uplifting story. And there's a documentary which I have yet to see about him as well. But yeah, I thought that was a really cool shout out by. I'm sure it was probably Gordon-Levitt that made that call. Yep. I can't imagine that was the costume designer or anything. But yeah, really cool.
Joseph Gordon-Levitt is one of my my favorite actors out there. Just I don't think there's any I say this a lot, but there's another. He's another guy that I will see anything that he's in just because. I appreciate the person that he is more than anything else.
Yes.
Obviously, he's a talented actor, but, I mean, the one drawback is, he's a great actor, but this movie was no Angels in the Outfield, so that's why I couldn't go any higher than Florida.
Again, as we talked last week, Angels in the Outfield is the cream of the crop of Joseph Gordon-Levitt movies, in Wayne's mind at least. All right, so moving right along, we're going to go into the more somber parts of the podcast. Gone but not forgotten. We actually have a combo this week because of who we're going to talk about. It is going to be a Bruce Lee, Brandon Lee talk session about their careers and something similar that happened to both of them that was unfortunate at the time in their careers. But first, we'll start with the deaths this week. Raymond Allen from Good Times and Sanford and Son passed away. Trini Lopez, singer and Dirty Dozen actor. Linda Manns from Days of Heaven, Out of the Blue, Gummo, and The Game with Michael Douglas, only 58 years old. She passed away. And independent filmmaker and Emmy winner Ash Christian, only 38 years old, passed away. Very sad. We hope they're resting in peace. And we are moving on to Brandon Lee and Bruce Lee. So Brandon Lee, shooting The Crow in 1993, was injured on set. And it was the scene, if anyone's familiar with the movie, it's a scene that's in the beginning of the movie where they break in and it's flashbacks in the movie. They start going to attack them and kill them, and Brandon Lee's character gets a gun pulled on him and he gets shot. Now, I just watched actually a TV show called Cursed on Shudder where they dive behind the scenes of this movie and they kind of talk about what happened. So apparently Brandon Lee was coming, or the main guy was coming through the door. Brandon Lee, I think he was standing in another doorway, and the actor that played Fun Boy had the gun, and it wasn't when they had the camera lined up, didn't look right. So they're like, we got to move him. So they moved him, and this is something that's become known as the Brandon Lee rule now in Hollywood. They moved him, and they were like right in front of each other. And so when he pulled the trigger, there was a dummy bullet that was the cartridge was stuck inside. It ejected, hit him, and it killed him. He was only 28 years old. His career was just taking off. And that, like I said, now they make sure that you can't do that anymore on set. The gun is checked by literally everybody. I've listened to a podcast with 2 directors, and they're like, everybody has to check the gun. Even like the craft services guy, come over, check the gun, because they want to make sure that nothing is lodged in there, nothing's going to happen. So this happened in 93. He was 28 years old, as I said, and his career was just taking off. The Crow, they had to finish it, so they did some CGI work, made a creepy mask of his face, and put it on the actor that finished the work for him. And the movie was done. And the movie came out, and the movie was very successful. It would have probably launched him into the stratosphere as, a up-and-coming star, an action star. And it didn't, because he passed away before the movie was done. Now, going back to Bruce Lee had done a bunch of movies in his career. He obviously was the star of The Green Hornet. At 32, Bruce Lee went and he was doing some voiceover pickup stuff for Enter the Dragon. Or Way of the Dragon, I think. Way of the Dragon. And then he had an edema or a heart attack of some kind, and that unfortunately ended his life. And that was before. Now, Bruce Lee was famous, but that was before Enter the Dragon came out.
Yeah.
So
Enter the Dragon was the one he was doing the pickup lines for, because that's the one that came out in '73, right around the time of his death.
yeah, so he did Enter the Dragon, and it hadn't come out yet. He passed away, and when it came out again, like Brandon, or before, like Brandon, it was a huge hit, and it would have probably launched him into a bigger stratosphere than he was already in, and his career and life ended very short, and it was very sad. Bruce Lee was a very philosophical person, as we've come to learn over time. You know, Wayne, you and me, obviously, we weren't alive to experience Bruce Lee being alive. One of those few actors that came to screen and died before we even really had the chance to watch his movies, and we've kind of had to take in what we know about him over the years just from what we can read and what we can find. There's lots of theories, the Lee family curse, which obviously isn't real, but people want to believe it because it's hard when someone young like that and someone with so much capability passes away, and someone like Bruce Lee specifically, and Brandon Lee for that matter, healthy, in the prime of their life, health-wise, you don't expect it. So people start coming up with these things like, oh, it had to be this, it had to be that. It was the Chinese mafia put a hit on Bruce Lee, and then 20 years later, the Chinese mafia put a hit on Brandon Lee, and it's like, why? And they were almost exactly 20 years apart from each other too, which is pretty crazy. So there are those correlations. They were both very young. It was both right before their star-making movie came out. So there's that correlation as well. But when I think about Brandon Lee specifically for us, because The Crow was really where we came to know him, it didn't hit me as much because when he passed directly, because we hadn't seen The Crow yet. It was like, well, that sucks. Like, the guy from Rapid Fire passed away. This Crow movie looks pretty cool though, but we'll see what happens. But then I saw The Crow, and I was like, oh, like, we're never going to get another movie with this kid ever again? Like, what the hell? Like, this sucks. So it hit me more as kind of time went on. And it still, as I watched the movie over and over again, it still hits me. And the same with Bruce Lee. Like, imagine if Bruce Lee had lived, to 60, 70 years old. Like, what we would have had for him.
I mean, you stop and think about the effect that Bruce Lee has had on pop culture. I mean, you think about, Quentin Tarantino's two movies, very much.
The Kill Bill, yep.
The Kill Bills, yep, absolutely.
Lots of homages to Bruce Lee in there.
The yellow jumpsuit with the black stripes. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're talking about a man that took down Walker, Texas Ranger. You know what I mean? Hey, you think you're a badass? Take this. Yeah.
Well, and you talk about, just the impact he's had. The fact that we have 4 Ip Man movies based on the guy who trained Bruce Lee. Like, that's the main reason those movies got made. Now, that guy was famous for a lot of other reasons, but that was their selling point when they made those movies, was like, Bruce Lee trained with this guy. Like, you got to see these movies. So he's had this impact. I mean, he's been portrayed over and over again by other actors. Dragon, the Bruce Lee story, came out a year after Brandon Lee passed away, so it was really a touching time for that movie to come out. A really good story, too, in that. Very well done. Jason Scott Lee, no relation, plays Bruce Lee in that. Good movie that you should also check out. And, just like you said, the impact he has today. His daughter is now in charge of all, I believe, of Brandon and Bruce's likeness and all that kind of stuff. And Bruce Lee, years ago, wrote a screenplay or a television script. I'm not sure which. It is a television show now, but he wrote something years ago as a treatment. Maybe she got that turned into a TV show. So like I think it's on Cinemax right now. Like, so he's still having an impact 40 plus years after his death, and that I think is pretty insane. And I think it's really cool. Now Brandon Lee, I don't think has gotten to that extent of his father, because he wasn't this super martial arts master that Bruce Lee was. But like I said, I think when people see The Crow, and if you haven't seen The Crow, you'll feel that, like, damn, like, how it sucks that we didn't get another movie from this guy.
Yep.
And it's it wasn't his fault. It wasn't the actor that fired the gun's fault. It was someone made a mistake in the prop department. Tragic mistake.
Tragic prop error. To blame like the prop master or anything like that at this point or at any point is just, it's unfair.
Yeah.
And just to you commented on never going to get another film from him. It's really the Heath Ledger or Keith Fletcher effect. When The Dark Knight comes out and Heath Ledger is already gone, and it's already got, you hear all the talks about awards and whatnot, and then you actually see it, and the film lives up to the hype. And thankfully, I mean, it's not the crystal clear, or it's not identical, because we knew how great Heath Ledger was from all of his previous work.
Yes,
and I think Dr. Parnassus. I know that's not the correct title.
Yeah, the Imaginarium of Dr. Pigna. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah. And I know it's not a starring role for Heath Ledger, but
well, it was supposed to be, but because he passed, they had to choose other actors to finish it off, which was a creative idea.
Right, but obviously, unfortunately, I'm going to use the term. His swan song was The Dark Knight,
yes.
And he went out on top. But as much as I enjoyed it, same thing. It's like, wow, I'm never going to see him in anything else.
Yeah, and it was an Academy Award-winning performance for Heath Ledger in that movie, and I feel the same way about him. And we'll have an episode where we dive into that as well. But yeah, it was. You're right. It was very similar. I do want to mention too, Michael Massey, who just passed away October of 2016. He played Fun Boy, and he was the one that pulled the trigger on that fateful day. And he, for the rest of his career, now he still worked as an actor up until he died, but that stuck with him. He never got over it. I've seen many interviews with the cast and crew. I heard Tony Todd talk about it on a podcast, and just said that Michael Massey was a very nice man, but unfortunately this thing happened to him as well. And I think people forget that even though it wasn't his fault, he was the one that pulled the trigger. And just to have to live with that has to be devastating. So I have to imagine that was not easy for him. But yeah, again, we talk about Brandon Lee because we're talking about The Crow in the beginning. We just don't want people to forget these guys, because Bruce Lee and Brandon Lee, I think they did a lot for martial arts before they passed away, and kind of brought it in. They both brought it into the mainstream. And I think it helped, and it really, I think we have martial arts films because of Bruce Lee today. I mean,
I was just going to ask, do you think we would have had the Karate Kid films? Do you think they would have been as big? Maybe, maybe not. You don't know, but
you know what? I bet you Bruce Lee would have been in them. Maybe he plays Mr. Miyagi.
You never know, but hey, yeah, that's a great debate we could have about, what ifs.
Well, we'll get into Karate Kid at some point soon, because the series will be hitting Netflix soon, so we'll talk about that as a whole series.
Have you seen Cobra Kai yet?
Only like 2 episodes. So when it hits Netflix, though, I'm going to binge the crap out of it, and then we'll talk about it.
I have seen it is so good, and I went in going, this is going to be lame. And I'm like, seriously, within like the first 5 minutes, I was like, oh.
I really liked the first 2 episodes, but then they took it down off of YouTube for free, so I didn't want to pay for it yet. So.
Well, that's why you just got to exploit it with the 10-day free trial, bro.
Yeah, I know. So anyway, so rest in peace to Bruce Lee and Brandon Lee. They've been gone for quite some time now. Bruce Lee, 1973, he passed away. Brandon Lee, 1993. They are very well missed to film fans, I think. The stuff that they could have done is something that we'll obviously never know, but your imagination kind of runs wild with it. So rest in peace to father and son, and we're going to move on to our next segment, which is what we've watched and recommendations. All right, so we're going to get into what we watched this week. I've watched some good things. I've watched a couple bad things. So I'm going to start with a movie that I kind of put off for a little bit because I haven't been a huge fan of his last couple movies. I actually haven't seen them because they just didn't appeal to me. They didn't look good. The movie is called Richard Jewell. It's directed by Clint Eastwood. It's about Richard Jewell, who was a suspect in the Atlanta bombings at the Olympics in the 90s. He didn't do it. This movie kind of shows how he was made a suspect, basically. He was convenient for the authorities and for the news media. They attacked him. They went after him. It was horrible. If you watch this movie, the FBI and the news media do not come off well at all, as they should not come off well at all, because they were really horrible to him. It's a great lead turn for Paul Walter Hauser. He's been in a few things. He was in the show Kingdom, which I talked about already on one of our podcasts a couple times, actually. He was really good in that, too. But he was in I, Tonya as well. He was really good in that. He is fantastic as Richard Jewell. It also helps to have Academy Award winners Sam Rockwell and Kathy Bates by your side to help you. They were fantastic. Sam Rockwell, as much as this is Hauser's movie, Rockwell steals every scene in this movie. He's fantastic. It's a return to form for Clint Eastwood. I always get on him sometimes because he does movies. He's very He's a very dry filmmaker when it comes to like camera movements. He's very simple. He's not very stylistic, which works for some movies and doesn't work for every movie. This movie, it works for it because he lets the characters kind of tell the story and take over the camera, and that I think works perfectly for this style of movie. Everybody, like I said, is fantastic in it. You also have John Hamm and Olivia Wilde, as John Hamm is the FBI man who makes his life a living hell, and Olivia Wilde is the reporter who makes his life a living hell. Very good movie. It's on HBO or HBO Max. If you haven't seen it, check it out. Probably one of Clint Eastwood's better films in the last 10 years or so. All right, so moving on. I'm going to go to the horror world, talk about La Llorona. La Llorona is known in Hispanic mythology as a weeping woman who's mourning the death of her children who were drowned, or she drowned them, or they were killed, or whatever, and she's out for revenge. They did it in the Conjuring universe with The Curse of La Llorona. That movie sucked. This movie is very good. It's kind of slow. It's a slow burn for sure. It's more of like a dysfunctional family drama, and I've mentioned that before with horror films. The grandfather, or the dad / grandfather, is a horrible general who basically is accused of genocide. And his ghosts haunt him, and they start haunting the family. And that's kind of how this all works out. They work in the La Llorona story into this backstory of this general and his family. And I think it works perfectly. It's one of those horror films where the horror isn't really in it till like the last 10 minutes. But when it comes, you're just like, you're ready for it. It's only an hour and a half, so it doesn't, even though it drags a little bit in the beginning because it's a slow burn, it doesn't really take that long to get to the end. Really good flick. Catch it on Shudder. If you listen to us and you don't have Shudder and you like horror films, then what is wrong with you? And then I watched one of my favorite buddy comedy movies from the 90s. It's hard to talk about, as we've talked about this man before. It's The Hard Way. It stars James Woods and Michael J. Fox. James Woods, in my opinion, has become human garbage, so I don't like to talk about him as much. But this movie, it's fantastic. It's a lot of fun. They're great together. Great chemistry from both leads. Again, it's unfortunate that he's such a piece of trash. But one of the main parts to talk about this movie is Stephen Lang. Stephen Lang from Avatar, Don't Breathe. He plays the villain known as Party Crasher. And he's really good here. He's really crazy. Kind of giving his all for this 90s like B-action flick comedy. And I think he did a great job. And that was kind of one of the highlights of the movie. Also has Delroy Lindo and LL Cool J in it. They get a lot of use out of Mama Said Knock You Out. They play that a couple of times. Good movie. Rent or buy it wherever. I did watch Armed and Dangerous when we talked about that last week. Good movie, yes. John Candy. I'm not going to go into detail. If you haven't seen it, rent it or buy it. Assimilate, watched on Netflix. Not very good. It's another invasion of the body snatchers. In my opinion, the only good invasion of the body snatcher movies are the 1970s version with Donald Sutherland and the 90s version, The Faculty, directed by Robert Rodriguez. Fantastic movies. Assimilate does some things okay, most things pretty bad. The last thing I'm going to talk about is something I haven't posted about yet, and it's a movie called The Outpost. Directed by Rod Lurie, stars are Scott Eastwood, son of Clint, Caleb Landry Jones from the X-Men First Class movie and a bunch of other movies. He was also in Get Out, and Orlando Bloom. It's a movie based in 2009, the Afghanistan War, and it's these soldiers were put in this horrible spot like below, and their vantage point from the Taliban is like just aiming down. You know, we all know that from watching movies and stuff. You shouldn't be down. You should be up. And for some reason, they were told to protect this place, and they had to stay down. And it was really difficult. They obviously lost a lot of people. The movie it's a true story, and the book was written by CNN's Jake Tapper, and the movie was adapted from that. And it's really well done. The war sequences are really good. It's very emotional, obviously. A lot of death happens, and it's real. And some of the guys that actually lived it are in the movie, playing themselves, which is pretty crazy. But really good movie. Scott Eastwood gives a really good performance. Reminds me a lot of his father in this one. Caleb Landry Jones, though, really kind of steals this movie. He's really good in pretty much everything he's in, and he's really good in this. Orlando Bloom's probably in it for about 30 minutes. He does a good job, though. I mean, a good Southern accent for a guy from England. So definitely worth checking out. You could rent or buy it today. Side note, it does also have Mel Gibson's son, Milo Gibson, in a small part in it, who's I didn't even know was an actor until recently. So a little interesting tidbit there. Good movie. Check it out. You could rent or buy it today. All right, Wayne, on to you. What did you watch?
I have been watching a lot of ESPN 30 for 30 this week. Starting out with something that is near and dear to me. I don't know exactly how you feel, but the 85 Bears, the story of one of the greatest football teams ever assembled. The 1985 Chicago Bears were a team of big talent, big ego, and big success. This documentary explores the success and players behind it, as well as the questions surrounding the lack of a repeat performance. If you're not familiar with 30 for 30 ESPN documentaries, they are pretty much all fantastic. I love this one, obviously, because it hits so close to home. Mm-hmm. The 85 Bears, I was 3 years old. I don't remember them. I only remember what I've learned about them and Walter Payton and
Same
Jim
here.
McMahon.
Yep.
They're all involved in this. Well, obviously, they talk a lot about Walter Payton and his tragic passing from bile duct cancer. But a lot of this centers around the Bears' defensive coordinator, Buddy Ryan, and his relationship with middle linebacker Mike Singletary. This documentary came out in 2016, shortly before Buddy Ryan passed away. And it just really, it went really deep and honest about the makeup of this team and the partying and Bears linebacker Otis Wilson talked about, man, I'm glad that we played what we played because if social media existed, I don't think any of us would have stayed in the field because we all would have been suspended. Just that kind of lifestyle, that just a city who loves their football and loves their athletes, I don't know. I can't honestly say who was loved more, the mid-90s Bulls or the mid-80s Bears. I mean,
I would honestly go Bears because their championship was longer ago, and I feel like people respect more of them than they do. In the Bulls, it's mainly you talk about Michael Jordan, but with the Bears, it's just that team was so dominant. And in a time when football, that's the other thing. In the NBA around that time, people were, it wasn't as tough, but it was pretty tough back then. With football, that was definitely one of the tougher times of football. So
yeah. The other, I also watched King's Ransom, which was the first 30 for 30 done in, I believe, 2009, starring, in regards to Wayne Gretzky being sold from the Edmonton Oilers to the LA Kings. It was good. It's hockey. If you're into hockey, it's great to watch. But you talk about one of the greatest hockey players of all time being basically sold off for money and, ruined a franchise. And
I'll let Babe Ruth.
Yeah. Although the Edmonton Oilers did win a cup after he left, they were never the same. The LA Kings never really lived up to the hype. Wayne Gretzky took them to a Stanley Cup in '93, but they didn't win. Oh, it's great overall. The last one that I'm currently watching, for you, I apologize in advance. This is Catching Hell, the Steve Bartman 2003 fiasco. I am sure that,
That son of a gun. I'm just kidding. I don't blame him at all. There's a crazy time.
This is hard to watch, not because I am a White Sox fan. I'm like, Cubs, you'll love that. No, it's just the way the fans reacted toward this man who was just trying to catch a ball that was hitting his general direction. Just, this guy's life was basically destroyed because of it. And, they've got, in this documentary, they got fans, saying we need to kill him. We got this guy's address. Let's go burn his house down. Just makes all Chicago fans and just sports fans look really, really petty. And I can't say, if I was a Cubs fan and this happened and it cost us a shot at and even though it didn't, the play did not cost the Cubs the series because
it was a foul ball.
Yeah. There was an error involved later in that inning, and there's a whole other game to play.
Yeah.
Seriously, I think anybody who you bring up Steve Bartman, and you're a Cubs fan, sir. So I just want to ask your opinion.
I haven't seen it yet. It's sad though that it happened to this gentleman. Obviously, I'm not one of those Cubs fans that ever blamed him. Again, there was a foul ball. The batter was still at the plate. So Mark Pryor still had plenty of time to get him out. A ball rolled between one of the players' legs into the outfield, a la the Boston Red Sox from years ago.
Buckner.
Yeah.
Who also played for the Cubs at one point.
Yes, he did. And it went downhill, and then we had Kerry Wood pitching Game 7. Everyone felt good. That was a disaster. So it didn't work out. Obviously, we got our World Series, but it's sad that this gentleman went through what he went through. And I'm just going to say this as a blanket statement. And it's not just Chicago. I'm going to go Chicago, Philadelphia, New York, Boston. The majority of sports fans from those places are pretty terrible. And I've been not to very many Cubs games. Okay, I could probably count on my hand. I've probably been to 10, maybe, on my hands. I've probably been to 10. And at least at one of them, me and my best friend, we were sitting in the bleachers, and some dude is yelling the N-word at the players from the Pirates. And I'm like, what is going on? Like, why? Yeah. Terrible. Just terrible. And their excuse was he was drunk. I'm like, that's not an excuse, you idiot. So, yeah, sports fans in general, I think, could just be pretty awful, especially in the environment of when something like that happens.
Right.
So it's unfortunate that this gentleman had to endure that and endure it much more throughout his life. I think finally it's died down, but the damage has been done. So
that was what I was going to get. I'm glad you brought up the 2016 World Series victory after more than enough time had passed in between your guys' championships. Do you think that that's kind of like eased people's thoughts on him at all? Or
I think it has. I think most people are like, oh yeah, it really wasn't that dude's fault. And I think the series, the World Series win from 2016 obviously helps. I think unfortunately though, it didn't help him. Like that's what, he's what it's about now. You've turned what was a horrible division series for the Cubs into it's about this one guy, Steve Bartman. And that's not fair to him. That's not fair to the organization, too, because they, you know what? They had that series and they lost that series. They should be to blame for that, not Steve Bartman. But, yeah, I mean, it definitely, like I said, I didn't hate him when it happened. I don't hate him now. I've never had any ill feelings towards the man. But I do think the series win in 2016 did help probably a lot of people kind of subside that. Unfortunately, I think it was just too little too late.
Right. Well, and see, one of the things that really irritated me, even back then, is you started seeing White Sox fans with the Bartman on their jerseys, Bartman 03 and a white. It's just, have a little class. That's all I'm going to say,
Yes, exactly.
And I honestly don't get, we've talked about this numerous times as fans of the opposing teams in the city. You aren't a fan of the White Sox, but you don't hate them.
No.
But it's hard to root for them at all because the fans are so toxic. And, there's some of that I feel toward, Cubs fans.
Oh, and I'm sure there is. And I'm not that Cubs fan, but I'm sure there are Cubs fans that are super annoying, and I would not like them either, so.
Yeah. And, I mean, there's probably, we probably have some listeners that are either a South Side or North Side fan. And if you are one of those toxic fans, just, it's a game, first and foremost. Don't take it so seriously.
But if you're a Cardinals fan, go to hell.
Yeah, and,
Just kidding.
Hell with the Yankees. I'm going to say it. Sorry, Vinny. And whoever else is a
Yankees fan? Oh, yeah. Screw the Yankees.
And don't even get me started on them cheddar heads up north. I tell you first and foremost there, my friend. Anyway, so that's what I've been watching. I also am almost finished with season 2 of Ozark, which I started watching on your recommendation. And, yeah, it's everything that everybody has said it would be. I'm enjoying it very much.
I told you.
Yep.
It's great. I will mention 2 more things before we get into the recommendation part of this. Umbrella Academy Season 2. I just finished it. Fantastic. If you haven't started watching that, watch that show now. Another new show that just came out on Friday called Teenage Bounty Hunters. Really good. I'm like 5 episodes in, I think. It's these 2 teenagers who meet up with this older gentleman, Kadeem Hardison, by chance, who's a bounty hunter. And they get excited because they help him catch a bounty. So they want to be bounty hunters. So he kind of starts training them, even though they can't officially be bounty hunters because they're not old enough to get a license. It's really fun. It's called Teenage Bounty Hunters, but don't be confused. It's not TV-14. It's TVMA. It starts off with sex in the beginning. There's violence. There's nudity. There's bad language. So if you're, don't see the title and be like, oh, it's a good show for my teenage daughter or teenage son. Probably not. At least don't watch it with them because you'll probably feel uncomfortable. But it's a good show. Like I said, I'm about halfway through. So check that out as well. For recommendations this week, I want to get into something I've talked about several times on this show. I talked about it today, and it's Shudder. Shudder is a horror channel that you can purchase either on Amazon or Roku, or even on their website. There's a Shudder.com that you can watch live there as well. Shudder mainly focuses on horror films. Right now, popular movies: 3 from Hell, The Devil's Reject sequel, Mandy, the original Halloween, Summer of '84, The Beach House, Revenge, both really good. Changeling from the 1980s, really good movie. The Burning, good slasher flick. Haunt is a newer slasher movie, pretty good. Blood Quantum is a new zombie flick, really good. I talked about Scream Queen, the Nightmare on Elm Street 2 documentary. That's streaming exclusively on Shudder. You could rent or buy all this stuff, but they're mainly on Shudder. Train to Busan, Old Boy, the original. Heathers, one of my favorites. Hellraiser, great movie. Sleepaway Camp. Just if you're hearing these movies I'm mentioning are good, and that's why I'm telling you to go here. The Wailing, Ginger Snaps, Night of the Living Dead, which streams everywhere. And then they've got Joe Bob Briggs, who I've talked about many times on social media. He's a horror personality from the 80s and 90s. They gave him a new show on Shudder. It's fantastic. I recommend checking it out. It's called The Last Drive-In. They just had a special episode drop this last Friday that I've yet to watch. Really good. It's $5 to $6 a month. So if you can do it and you like horror films, definitely check out Shudder. I highly recommend it.
If you're looking for, like I just touched on the sports documentaries earlier, a couple more good ones that are on there. Both documentaries on the University of Miami are very entertaining. There's a very good one on Bo Jackson, and also I would watch the Brian Bosworth documentary on there as well.
I watched that one. I've only seen probably a handful of those. That was a good one.
And of course, Ric Flair. Got to watch that one as well.
Still haven't seen that one. I got to check it out.
It's very good. But that's all I got this week.
All right, so moving on, we're going to do, last week we started the news and notes section. It's just a real quick of me running through. I separated it this week. So news is going to be movies that are into production or have been talked about. Tron 3, starring Jared Leto, directed by Garth Davis, in the works. I like Tron 1 and 2. If you haven't seen them, I believe they're on Disney+. Check them out. MacGruber TV series coming to Peacock. Very excited about this. The underrated MacGruber movie that no one ever talks about. Zac Efron is making a 3 Men and a Baby remake with Disney+. So that's a little interesting. We talked about Zac a little bit last week. Bidding on a dark version of the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air reboot has started. There was a trailer a couple months back where it was like a dark version of Fresh Prince. It was a fan-made trailer that someone did that got a lot of traction, so people are excited about that. This is one thing I've talked about with friends before. The whole DC Universe thing, Titans and the Harley Quinn show. Well, guess what? It's all coming to HBO Max soon. I'm not sure when, but DC Universe is probably out the door now. I would imagine it'll all end up on HBO Max as HBO Max originals, which I'm excited for because I have HBO Max. And some of that stuff's supposed to be good. Never Have I Ever, a new Netflix show I highly recommend, has received a second season. R.L. Stine Fear Street movies are coming to Netflix. They're already done. They're going to be in the summer of 2021 called Summer of Fear. They're going to release all 3 in one a week for 3 weeks, I believe, in the summer. All right, movies and TV shows releasing in the next couple months. We're going to go start with Away, Hilary Swank space drama, September 4th on Netflix. All Together Now movie, August 28th on Netflix. Fargo, brand new season, September 27th. Chris Rock will be on FX and Hulu. Clive Barker's Books of Blood, Hulu movie, October 7th. You Cannot Kill David Arquette is a movie out August 28th. I'm going to talk a minute about this one. He, in the early 2000s, did a movie called Ready to Rumble. He went into wrestling shows because he loved wrestling, and they made him a champion. Everyone hated him because of it. They were pissed at David Arquette. He was pissed at himself that he let that happen. This documentary covers that. It covers his new venture into wrestling, and he is now a real wrestler. He's doing one of those indie wrestling tours, and he's bloodied and battered. It looks very interesting. Obviously, he's got Scream 5 coming out next year, so I'm excited about that. Run is a movie that was supposed to be in theaters. It will now be coming to Hulu soon, starring Sarah Paulson. Eli Roth's History of Horror Season 2 will be on AMC in October, and will probably follow and be on Shudder after that, which is what happened with Season 1. The Babysitter, Killer Queen, a movie I'm very excited about as a sequel to The Babysitter with Samara Weaving, who unfortunately is not returning, will be out September 10th on Netflix. Unpregnant, September 10th, HBO Max movie, looks really good. Kind of a coming-of-age story. The Devil All the Time with Tom Holland and Robert Pattinson is a serial killer thriller movie hitting Netflix September 16th. And in October, we get something called Welcome to Blumhouse. Blumhouse is a horror production company run by Jason Blum, and they are going to debut 4 movies in 2 double features on Amazon Prime. So if you have Amazon Prime, they will be free, and that'll be out in October, the first 2 weeks of October. The movies are called The Lie, Black Box, Nocturne, and Evil Eye. And then lastly, we have Scare Me, a new horror movie, hit Shudder October 1st. So those are your news and notes for the week. Thank you for listening to us. Week 8 now showing with Mike and Wayne. We hope you enjoyed the show. We will be back next week.